This episode of the Police One podcast is sponsored by Officer Store. Learn more about getting the gear you need at prices you can afford by visiting officerstore.com. Hey, what does research tell us about crime strategies? How can we get back to proactive policing? I have a terrific guest today to shed some light on evidence-based policing and how it may help with proactive policing. Well, of course, you're listening to Policing Matters on policeone.com, and I'm your host, Jim Dudley. I hope you're checking us out on YouTube if you're just listening, and vice versa. Well, to me, it feels like we're pulling up and out of the malaise and ill effects from 2020, including the pandemic, the George Floyd killing, and mass protests around the country. My guest today is a former police officer from Baltimore, Maryland, and she is renowned among academic and practitioners alike, well respected in the community. I think she should be on the evidence-based Mount Rushmore when we start one up. Dr. Cynthia Lum is a professor of criminology, law, and society and director of George Mason University's Center for Evidence-Based Crime Policy. She's written and contributed on books that describe best practices and use of evidence-based policing, including co-authoring Evidence-Based Policing, Translating Research into Practice on Oxford University Press with a co-author, Professor Christopher Coper. Got ahead of myself. Hey, welcome to Policing Matters, Dr. Cynthia Lum.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, and it was a process getting you on. I saw you at IACP in October of 24 in Boston. Terrific. Lots of accolades about your 4Gs and getting out of the patrol cars and getting back into it. I loved it. Talking about proactive policing, since 2020 and all of that and the negative feelings towards cops, we lost so much ground. And as a patrol officer today, how can proactive policing be done effectively and safely given heightened scrutiny from communities and the media?
Well, again, thank you for having me, Jim. That's a fantastic question. And luckily, we have a lot of knowledge and research to speak to that question. First of all, I think, well, there's a number of things that I think police officers can do today to be more proactive. And I feel like these things were relevant before 2020 and back to the 1990s, when we first started developing the research in this area. The first thing is I think that officers need a much wider toolkit for proactivity. The main things that officers use for proactive policing are pretty much traffic stops and kind of what I would call a generalized patrol, driving to places that they might think are hot in terms of crimes or disorder or traffic problems or whatever they're working on. But that's what we would call a very narrow toolkit and a very generalized one. Those two options can't be applied to every single challenge that's out there. So officers need a much wider toolkit of proactivity, and they need choices on what to do for given situations under certain circumstances with regards to particular crime or traffic or disorder incidents. That toolkit is informed also by a large body of knowledge on proactivity, and they are not receiving, in my view, that knowledge in academy or in service or even leadership training. And we can go into specifics of what that knowledge says, but that knowledge speaks to the various strategies and tactics of proactive policing, problem solving, community engagement, targeting, using analysis, optimizing technological approaches. It speaks to a wide variety of different things that can be applied. So not only do they need that wider toolkit, they also need the knowledge, and they need the knowledge on not just what works, but how to get things to work within the within the parameters of their job. a lot of proactivity also requires things like problem solving, community engagement requires true teamwork. Oftentimes we give a lot of lip service to teamwork in policing, but policing is actually very individualized. It's very individualized in terms of the way that officers exercise their discretion. Like you could have 7 folks on a squad, like I did, and they all have different approaches to the way they patrol, and it's very individual based. So you really need that true teamwork. And in order for teamwork to be successful, you need good strategies and a coordinated strategy for proactive policing. And I feel like that's a part of the recipe of successful proactivity. And I would say also police officers need support and mentorship and guidance on how to be proactive. And I don't mean that anybody has those answers per se. I think that mentorship and support and transformational supervision is something that has been lacking in policing even before 2020, even for a very long time. And it's not the police supervisor's fault. It's simply because we've locked ourselves into a very reactive, transactional approach to policing. It's like decades of a particular approach to policing that's led to not developing that side of policing that is more proactive, that's more guidance oriented, that's more mentorship focused. Um, and and so officers, it's a long answer to your question, but I think there is multiple things that need to happen for officers to successfully implement what we know now is effective measures to prevent and deter crime, traffic, you name it, disorderly behavior. I mean, there's so many things now that we know can work.
Yeah, and I mean, so many critics of police are talking about how we're seeing great crime stats now, lower crime stats. But I feel like a lot of it's attributable to the part 2 UCR crimes that uh, cops are witness to. Proactive policing generates seeing suspicious people, taking them on, finding a knife, finding drugs, warrants, what have you, where that 2020 effect seemed to be, let's just stay in the car and go from run to run. We don't feel the support from not only our own supervisors, but city leadership and the community at large. I feel like that's changing now. In California, here near San Francisco, where I am, we had a strict police commission that said, don't pull, the opposite of what you're saying, don't pull people over. Here's a whole list of things we don't want you to pull people over for. And cops felt really criticized for proactive policing, so they tended to pull back. It feels different now. We've
Yeah.
in the region, we've recalled 2 different DAs, one from San Francisco, one from Oakland, who were so permissive, wouldn't follow up on good police work. And we just removed in San Francisco a police commissioner who spearheaded events to tamp down and restrict use of force policies, pulling people over, traffic stops, and of course, based everything in this sort of race category. But it feels different now. It feels like with the support of technology and some evidence-based policing strategies, it feels like we're encouraging cops to get out of the cars again.
Let me offer you and your listeners a bit of a challenge to this type of thinking, right? Stats can go up and down. Crime can go up, crime can go down. And let me say it's also very local. Crime can go down in the United States more generally, but if it's affecting a community or a neighborhood, they're not going to be concerned if crime goes down in the United States. They're like, what's happening in my neighborhood right now? And I feel the strains and the burden of crime or what have you in their place. So stats can go up and down, and let me also say politics can go back and forth. On the one hand, people might say, okay, we're going to let loose the leash a little bit, and on the other hand, they're going to say, no, we're not going to. And different crises can cause all kinds of different problems. let me challenge you and your listeners to not think about that noise, right? Because in some ways it's just noise. In across decades, and for the police agency and for police officers who want to find meaning and joy in their work, and want to make this a career that I think is a really good one, and an intellectual one, a noble one. But if they want to do that, they have to kind of think beyond that and say, all right, if we are going to be proactive, which the evidence points to as being effective, then we have to be more, not just more strategic and more coordinated in our proactivity, but we have to be specific in it, in that, for example, problem solving is a form of proactivity that's very tailored and targeted to particular problems that come about, with a solution that's tailored towards that problem, right? It requires a thinking approach, an approach that is like more thoughtful in terms of why we're using this tactic or strategy to deal with this particular problem. The police, it's not just about, okay, now it's okay for us to be more proactive and get out of our cars. Okay, if they get out of their cars, then are they doing, right? Folks confuse hotspots policing with an actual tactic. Hotspots is just about where. It's just where. It's like, okay, here is a hotspot. We need to first go there. But when we talk about, we have something called the 4Gs, it's just a kind of reminder on what to do. The police not only need to go to the hotspot to fulfill hotspot policing, but they also have to get out of their car. And the reason why we say this is because we hypothesize that by getting out, you're showing a greater commitment to your prevention and your deterrence intention, right? And you have to go up to whatever the issue is. You can't just go out and just look around. You have to go up to and address and deal with the particular issue. And I'm sorry, there's a mower outside. I don't know if you can hear it. Hopefully it'll go away.
We can edit that a bit.
Um, it so going back to the 4Gs, they need to go up to, which means engaging. And sometimes that engagement is not an enforcement engagement. Sometimes it's just a community engagement, or an engagement that's trying to improve a relationship between the police and people. And sometimes they have to go in. So, for example, one of the biggest problems that I often hear about from police commanders is theft in big box stores, shoplifting. This is a huge issue right now that all communities tend to face at one point or another. And we believe that when officers actually go into the store, as opposed to patrolling outside of the store in the parking lot, they can create a larger deterrent effect. However, there's also caveats on that, right? Some of you may have heard about the Coper curve. Chris Coper, my co-author of the book. The Coper curve is an idea that, okay, even if you were to get out and go into and go up to, right, and patrol hotspots, you have to do it in a way that optimizes the deterrent effect of that interaction. So there used to be a belief that you could put a cop on a hotspot and just let them stay there all day and, walk foot patrol or something. That's totally inefficient. And not only that, but the police don't have the resources to do such things, right? What I mean, going back to what I had said earlier about not paying so much attention to politics and stats, is that police have to develop this deeper understanding of how prevention and deterrence works. That is the underlying knowledge base of all kinds of proactivities that police can engage in that we know are effective, from problem solving to hotspots to community engagement, whatever you're working on. If they have a better understanding of how prevention and deterrence works, then they can act in ways that are more meaningful. So for example, the Cooper curve. You literally don't have to stay in hotspots for, more than 12 to 15 minutes to create that deterrent, that halo effect after you leave. That's the residual deterrent effect. However, the Cooper curve, what some people forget about it is that it also requires you to come back unexpectedly, right? So it's a combination of timing, both within the stay and also timing in terms of how you're going to the place, like unexpectedly. I give this one example to point out that when you're trying to optimize proactivity, you not only need that wider toolkit, you need that knowledge base, you need that support and supervision, you need to also have this knowledge about how these things actually work. And I say all of this to come back to our original question, I guess, about this, which is it's not as simple as, or it's not as straightforward as maybe this year the politicians are okay with the police being more active, okay? Or this year they're not. They want the police to stop being more active, right? No matter what the case is, the police have to think more carefully about their tactics and strategies, and that requires them to be well equipped with all of this knowledge that I am talking about. And that is the basis of evidence-based policing. It really is saying, if the police want to be effective, either in crime control or in their own internal challenges, they've got to pick apart and then figure out how to tailor the solution. And then check if it actually works,
Yeah, the assessment, so important.
That's right.
So evidence-based policing, you're doing it in daily patrol work. What are practical ways that a patrol officer can apply evidence-based policing strategies in their daily shifts without making it feel like an academic burden, that like they've got a template or a book as they're driving down the street? I forgot to do this.
Yeah. Such a great question, Jim. I'm trying to figure out a way to answer this in a very short period of time. The officer's practical approach is dependent on the institution's ability to make that practical approach possible. Okay, what I mean by this is that you can't just tell officers, hey, go out there and be more proactive, do more traffic stops or something like that. If they don't have the tools, if they don't have the time, if they are not given the rewards for it, if they're not recognized for what they're doing, if they're not also corrected when they're doing proactivity incorrectly, or they're not applying, an approach that is legal or appropriate or legitimate. They need aspects of the organization to be able to correct, to support, to reward, to supervise. That includes their interaction with CAD. The CAD, this is a simple example, but CAD is so good at recording crime and calls for service. It is horrible at reporting proactive policing. I mean, the categories for proactive policing are like patrol check, or like follow up, or other's a good one. That one's used like so often in the CAD, right? While it will have 300 categories for different types of crimes and calls that it's going to, right? So I'm giving this example to say that to help officers be able to practically implement proactivity in patrol, you need to build infrastructure in patrol deployment to make that happen, okay? And leaders do a disservice to their officers when they tell them, hey, go out and be more proactive. And that trickles down all the way down to the first line supervisors, right? Say, hey, look, we need you to be more proactive. And an officer's like, Okay. And what do? They fall back on what they know: traffic stop and generalized patrol, right? Or,
Right.
when I was a patrol officer in the 1990s, it meant zero tolerance, stop and frisk. I mean, that was the name of the game back then.
Mhm.
And so they fall back to what they know, and that's just a symptom. It's like a residual of the fact that the agency is not its infrastructure is not built to create that environment in which they can be successful in proactivity. Okay.
Mhm.
So oftentimes agencies are asking me and Chris, hey, can you just tell us what to do about proactivity? Like, can we just give us some tools and we'll go and have our officers do them? And my response is we give them the tools, but it's going to lead to resentment. It's going to lead to confusion. The officers are going to do it, and then nobody recognizes them because there's no
Mhm.
rewards infrastructure for it. There's no recording of it. So it's almost like the proverbial tree that falls in the forest and nobody hears it, right? um, and then you have what I call incongruence across the ranks of officers, in which what I mean by this is some supervisors will support the type of proactivity that I'm talking about, and then their supervisors will be opposed to it. And then their captains will be supportive, and then their majors will be opposed to it. And then some majors and other majors have arguments about what they're in agreement with or not with regards to what the officers should be doing on a day-to-day basis. Some majors are like, this evidence-based policing is great. Other majors might say, this is ridiculous. This is not real policing, right? So that incongruence is really a part of that infrastructure of the police organization. And it works against answering your question, creating practical solutions for officers on just a day-to-day basis to go out and do what they do. Why? Because the practical solutions on day-to-day basis of what officers are doing are completely dependent on everything that the organization is about.
Yeah.
And for so long, police have relied on, you know, standard operating procedures, and they have got a lot of standard operating procedures. They think that's the organization, right?
Mhm.
Um, but it's not, and in many ways, it works against both, not just change, but it works against finding ways for officers to use what is known as their non-committed time
Mhm.
wisely. That time in between calls for service is the most important time for an officer. It is the golden time. I call it the golden time. If you can reap that gold, then you can be a happier officer and also be effective in what you're doing. But everything about the organization is not focused on that time. It's focused on the reactive time, which is like, how do we react to 911 calls and things like that. The challenge is that those times are so codependent on each other. If you can get a grip on the non-committed time and that time where you do proactivity, you're more likely to reduce your volume of calls for service. And it's that balance of proactive and reactive that really makes for effective patrolling. Um,
Yeah, I hear you. And
I that by the way, Jim, you asked how do we make it less academic. I don't even think about it as academic. This is like tactical. This is strategic. Uh, you need that infrastructure in place in order for the officers to be able to implement things that that we know are effective.
yeah, but that calls for buy-in across the board, right? So the commanders and the supervisors. We've had Tamara Harold on the show
Oh, she's
talking
great.
about,
Yeah.
she's awesome, about place-based violence and place-based crime. And where, inherently cops know where it's happening. Sometimes it's just hard for them to articulate it. And to your point, I think about prevention, right? That the time spent doing these things that are preventative in nature don't yield those quantitative statistics that supervisors want to see. Dudley, you're driving around for 10 hours. I got no arrests, no citations. What have you been doing all shift? And I've been going to those places and, by presence or by talking to people, I'm deterring crime. And so
That's right.
without the,
You don't want arrests. That's a measure of success when you
right?
made no arrests and you're able to handle the problem.
But that's where I think, we need to push that education
Yeah,
ground up sometimes to get the supervisors to understand that, yes, it's tough to prove prevention because we don't have stats to show. But I make an arrest for a drug deal and I'm off the street for 4 hours and booking property and booking suspects and writing police reports. So how effective do you want me to be?
I do think there has been movement, positive movement in the policing profession since I was a police officer, which was back in the 1990s. I do think there has been improvement in the knowledge base and in what officers and commanders and supervisors accept as truths about policing. And so I'm always encouraged. I try to encourage myself about this. I'm always encouraged about that because I don't think that many good commanders believe that arrest is the solution anymore. They know that arrest is not the solution, that we can't arrest our way out of crime, right? Um, but I think also accepting that more has to be learned and it can't just come about from like reading something or or training even doesn't do it. You've got to have a sea change within the mentality, the receptivity of the organization. And it starts all the way at the top. And it also starts with reducing the incongruence across the ranks. And that's a leadership issue, in my view. That's something that good leaders always work on. Trying to get cohesive thinking around the mandates of policing in their organization. And that's incredibly important and something that leaders can contribute to with regards to all of these evidence-based approaches that we talk about. Um, but there also needs to be actual real um, building blocks put into place. You got to reward officers for doing the right thing. You have to help them learn. New officers need basics like talking to people and engaging and being brave and things like that and knowing the procedures. But they also need guidance and mentorship on some of the more complex proactive approaches that may take place. And all of that is why I always argue that policing is an intellectual profession. People think it's not a widgets profession. It's not like, even a procedural profession, even though that sometimes police treat it as such. It's a thinking profession because the problems are so hard. Everything is hard in policing,
Yeah.
and sometimes dangerous. So you kind of have to minimize your risk while at the same time fixing things and showing your courage and thinking through problems and helping people who may not have the resources or the wherewithal to help themselves. And you have to be empathetic and sympathetic, and there's so much that officers, it's not just today, Jim. I think I could have been a better officer when I was a police officer. And if I had garnered more of these skills, but because I didn't, I was probably a mediocre patrol officer, just you see somebody running, you start running after them. Why? Right? It's like a reaction
Yeah.
more than anything else. You're not thinking, just
Well,
running into the burning building, you know.
don't undersell yourself. We have a motto, me and my fellow retirees, and we say, the older we get, the better we were. So don't go backwards.
Well, I have to say, sometimes I think about, I often have this nostalgia about like, oh, if I could fit back into my uniform, I'd go back into policing, and I wish that I know this is going to sound so cliche, but I wish that I had the knowledge now then. And part of it comes from experience, but also part of it comes from and maturing, I guess, and getting older. But some of it is just real knowledge that's the cops aren't getting right now. And they are perfectly capable, young and old, to receive this information. This is not, I don't believe that any knowledge is too difficult to be learned. And I also don't believe that there are people that can't learn it. You can always do it. It's about how it's translated, it's about how it's conveyed, it's about getting the right supervisor to motivate the young folks to do things, and gosh, I see so many great leaders and supervisors today who I would go back and work for in a heartbeat, you know, um, who just know what they're doing in evidence-based policing.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, sometimes they're ostracized in their own agency because they're seen as, weird or something,
Yeah.
but they have the right idea.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm with you. Hey, I want to ask you more about addressing crime and technology as well. But first, I'd like to take a moment and thank our sponsor.
Officer Store, equipping protectors with passion. That's how we operate, and it's how we live. We understand that having the right gear can mean the difference between life and death. Our goal is to get you the gear you need, when you need it, at prices you can afford. Visit us at officerstore.com.
And we're back, and I'm speaking with Dr. Cynthia Lum, author, professor, and researcher, and talking a little bit about technology and the impact on the line level patrol officer. From your research, Cynthia, what one technology could meaningfully improve safety and effectiveness for patrol officers right now?
So I'll answer this maybe in two ways. You'll never get a single answer from an academic. Sorry about that. I should have put my police hat on, but a straightforward answer, I guess. But first of all, the research on policing technology points to the same lesson. And that lesson is that technology is never the panacea. It only works so much so as the agency strategizes around it. So the police agencies do not bend technology, as Peter Manning, noted. They don't bend technology towards its will. Sorry, that other way around. What will happen is that technologies will be bent towards the will of the agency. So it can adopt a proactive technology, but it will use it in reactive ways. It will adopt an accountability technology like body-worn cameras, and then it will use it for its own purposes, right? And that's what happened with body-worn cameras, where they were initially adopted for purposes of the community wanted them to be adopted for purposes of accountability, but they primarily are used now for either investigations of crimes or for the police to protect themselves from frivolous complaints, or from what they would argue are frivolous complaints or what have you, or false accusations or something like that. So my first point is that no technology will help the police unless the police adjust to be more proactive, that is, unless the police adjust their underlying strategies to be more proactive. Okay. Having said that, the most important technology I believe that police agencies should focus on are information and analytic technologies. And what I mean by that is like the RMS system, the CAD system, the crime analysis, how they use those and how they develop them and how they integrate information to help them understand crime patterns, traffic accident patterns, patterns of individual officer challenges, like trying to understand if officers are abusing overtime or abusing sick leave or something like that, right? Mm-hmm. All of those things are important elements in proactivity, to be able to identify patterns and trends and analyze, et cetera. And to me, those are the most important technologies that a police agency can adopt. I would choose those any day over surveillance technologies and license plate readers and things like that. I think real-time crime centers, for example, that take that information technology and then find ways to integrate it, so important, right? But again, I've seen real-time crime centers where they're like ghost towns. Nobody's inside of them, nothing's happened, nobody's using them, right? And it's because an agency has not quite figured out how to best use that information in proactive ways, right? Reactive is okay for real-time crime center, but the point of real time is not just to know what's happening right at this moment, but to have information and intelligence consistently and constantly so that you can always see patterns ahead, right? And be prepared for what's ahead. Or to detect and then prevent something that's going to happen shortly in the future. And so, yeah, to me, those are the most important. They're kind of underdeveloped in a lot of American agencies. Many American agencies don't have the crime analytic tools. They maybe have 5 analysts for a couple hundred officers. They should have 20. That should be a huge group. The intel analysts and the crime analysts should be big groups in police agencies, as they are in the federal agencies. They should be doing things that support the proactive approach, not just the reactive approach, which they tend to support now, or stats collection and things like that I don't think is very helpful sometimes in terms of strategizing and tactical approaches for crime prevention.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you make me think about a couple of things. And one, as an administrator, is that, of course, the civilian side of the house, the analysts and the people that can help behind the scenes, they're the first to go when the budgets get cut, right? The cops are the priority. And so sometimes, we're penny wise and pound foolish. We end up with cops as analysts who don't really do that great a job. And I hear you there. I also think about, I've talked to a lot of people about real-time crime centers and their great successes, but then I hear the frustration from those who have real trouble gearing up and doing proactive things with their real-time crime centers. And I think those are the ones where, whether it's the administration or the chief, who say, I check a box, we got a real-time crime center, and then they don't staff it or they don't put the analysts in there. And so, it's almost doomed to failure from the beginning, and they don't know what they're doing wrong because they have a real-time crime center. But
that's exactly correct. And what you're describing is that lack of infrastructure to support that innovation, right? And so, yes, very much a problem.
Yeah. So, I am so thankful for your time. I want to wrap up and give you the opportunity to say, what do we say to cops now, whether they're young cops or older cops, veterans, that are balking a little bit, or looking at it the side eye to whether it's new technology or evidence-based practices that could really help them, but they're skeptical about it? How do we win them?
Yeah, this is tough, and it's not just officers. First line supervisors are a tough group often that I'm speaking to or working with on projects. And I would encourage them. I understand where they're coming from. The profession itself makes you incredibly cynical and angry sometimes about things, and it also makes you weary of supervision as well. And so all the things that in a positive way could help develop one's thinking and creativity and approach to their profession. And so I think the officers that I work with who give me a toehold a little bit are able to just give folks like me a chance right? Give the idea a chance. That's just a mindset that says, okay, you know what? Maybe this person has something that I can use. Okay, I may not like what overall, I may oppose my chief, I may have all of these negativities, but having some feeling of openness is so important. The agency itself and leaders can help develop that mentality amongst its officers and its supervisors by the way that they're expressing themselves and acting and reacting to things that are happening around them, right? I also think, aside from feelings and emotions, which that is, I think officers need tools. They actually need, you can't fix a car without knowing how to fix the car, right? So they need real tools that they can use, and they need to be trained on those tools, but then they also need to practice using those tools, right? This was a hard one to answer, Jim, because like all my questions, it's like policing is a wicked problem in many ways. Everything is connected. When you want to move this one thing over here, you have to move the whole organization, right? So you can't just encourage officers with words. You have to encourage them with tools, with support, with supervision, with mentorship, with positive thinking, with things that also help them with their physical and mental health. You've got to incorporate all of that. You have to help the community understand exactly what the police can and cannot do, and also get them involved in doing things that the police cannot do alone, right?
Yeah.
And so there's not one thing to help officers be more receptive to what I have to say, right? We have to strategize about a few important things, tools, supervision, accountability, tracking, knowledge, etc. We have to strategize about those things and how to strengthen them in our agencies. And that's how eventually we get officers on board. And let me encourage the officers who might be listening to this and the supervisors who are listening to this. Taking this task on, what I'm talking about today, it will be the most important thing you will do in your life. I know many of you have saved people, have like run into the burning house and saved others, and that's fantastic because that's like your courage, right? But what will be the most important thing that you can do is to shape the police organization in a way that makes it a better home for the next generation of police officers, both in what they're doing out in the public and also retaining them inside of the agency. It sounds like a lot of work, but somebody's got to start this, right? And if we don't start it now, then we leave it to the next group to try to work through it. And we can't do that. We can't do that.
Well, I think a big step is, cops have been fearful of these academic journals and reports and have a tough time, getting through the abstract alone. And then
so do we, Jim, so do we.
Much less, the 38-page study on the effect of lights and sirens in a shopping center or something like that, right? But
can I make a pitch? Can I make a pitch?
Yeah.
If that's too much for you, go to our matrix. We have the evidence-based policing matrix. We have just quick one-pagers. They're written for police, and they simply say, what was this intervention? How did they do it? And what happened?
Nice.
Something straightforward. And it's not that it's easier, but it's just, it kind of weeds through all the words and just sets it into a small, one pager for you.
Where can we find that?
cbcp.org. Our Center for Evidence-Based Crime Policy has its website. Everything on there is free to use and free to access. There's no firewall. And so the matrix, the evidence-based policing matrix, is on there, and it covers, hundreds and hundreds of studies that officers can see where people have been successful at using evidence-based approaches. Police officers have been successful at using evidence-based approaches to deal with particular problems.
Nice.
And so use those as your example. We've got the playbook, which is also on that website. Again, freely available. It gives you some quick plays on what to do during your proactive time. For those of you who want to develop investigations around places, kind of like what Tamara Harold was doing, right? We've got case of place tool in there. There's, for those of you who are doing training and field training, we've got conversions, things that like try to convert field training manuals and requirements into more evidence-based approaches. I mean, there's so many things that officers can use that are free now to help them with this venture.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, I've had the guys on, the editors of the Applied Police Briefings. That's a
Oh,
great rendering
Yes.
of studies and surveys.
ASCBP.
Yeah,
ASCBP has
American
stuff.
Society of Evidence-Based Policing, Renee Mitchell and
Yes.
Jason Potts. They've both been on the show, and they've got a
Yes.
great thing going. I think, there's this revolution of reaching out to the line patrol officer, making, academics less scary and breaking it down. And, you don't need a translation device to understand what it means. So I'm so
Yeah.
thankful for what you're doing for the profession to help keep cops safer, give them more knowledge and more tools to do a better job. Dr. Cynthia Lum, Professor of Criminology, Law and Society, and Director of George Mason University's Center for Evidence-Based Crime Policy. Thanks so much for taking time with us today.
Sure, it's my pleasure, and thank you.
All right. Hey, to our listeners, I hope you enjoyed today's show, and drop me an email. Let me know what you think at policingmatters@policeone.com. And I'd love to hear from you. And hey, thanks for watching. Thanks for listening, and take good care, stay safe, and I hope to talk to you again real soon.